of my past lives, I was a miner. I was an underground miner. And it was an adventure. It was a lot of fun. Did that for a number of years. Actually, that's a lie. It wasn't fun. It was terrible. But it paid well, so, you do what you do. One of the things that I did really benefit from in that sort of career was having these really skilled men that I worked with. They were excellent in their crafts. So everything from mechanics and welders, you had carpenters, you had masonry. Because we were a large mine, we had everything in-house. We had all our own engineers and all our own production guys. We had everything in-house. So we could do a lot very quickly and very effectively, which was really neat to work alongside people who had been professionally doing that thing for twice as long as I'd been alive. And so they didn't like it when I got promoted above them. That created some things that we had to work through, some interpersonal relationships. But one of the things I remember vividly learning is how these guys, as skilled as they are, love a good joke. And this is what would happen. There'd be a new guy on the crew, and they would set him up in such a way that, to help him learn, maybe learn the hard way, but still learn. And this looked like a couple things. One was there was always a sense in which they put him in a place where he should ask questions, and just if he doesn't ask questions, they just kind of let him go that route, right? I can remember one time in particular, we were pouring this big concrete pad. We had dug out this new room underground, and they were going to do a new machine bay to work on stuff. And so we're pouring all this concrete, huge room that we cut, and we're just doing it in portions, and we make up all the forms, and we got some wacky packers going, right? We're getting all this dirt level, getting it packed down, getting it solid. Turns out dirt underground is pretty solid to begin with, but little extra work never hurt. So we're doing that, and there's this new guy on the crew, and he'd never done any concrete work before. He transferred in from a utility line crew, which meant he was doing a lot of moving and equipment work. Anyway, he shows up, and they're like, all right, Mike, I need you to run this wacky packer over there. And he's like, all right, all right, how do I start? He started on top here, and okay, all right. If you're not familiar with these, it's like mechanical kangaroo, right? It just goes up and down really fast, really heavy. And it's got a big flat foot on it, right? And some of them have an extended foot. And so there's a handle on the one side, but if you don't know better, it looks like you're supposed to stand on the big foot. And so Mike does that, and he's like, how do I, he's like, this is awkward. And they're like, no, you got it, go ahead, that looks good. And so he's like, well, how do I start it? And they're like, we'll do it for you. We can help you out. And they started, and this thing, it just, he throws this way, the other guy goes the other way. And it was beautiful. It was a wonderful moment. And we laughed, and he cried, and it was great. It was a good time. Long drawn out story to kind of point out an obvious thing, that there's a design to this machine. And if you don't know the design, even good attempts, well-meaning, excellent, well-thought-out attempts without really understanding the design will hurt you. You can get really hurt. They say 50% of marriages end in divorce. That's a kind of a misleading statistic. They'll say, oh, well, even in Christian circles, 50% of marriages end in divorce. I actually would reject that. If you look at the data, there are a big portion of people who are not living according to the design, and it's costing them. But within Christian circles, I want to frame that data a little differently. If you were to say, how many of all these marriages we looked at, thousands and thousands and thousands, and 50% of them are going to end in divorce. No, don't ask that question. That's a bad question. What if you were to ask, what do the marriages look like for wives who hold conservative gender roles, just in the sense that genders are different and they work differently? Those wives who hold that belief and attend church at least 3 times a month with their husband. What do those marriages look like? And that same data would tell you that 73% of those would report high quality marriages, high degrees of satisfaction in home life, lowest record of abuse, highest satisfaction in money management and sex and family life. So there are some people who are not living according to design, and it's hurting them. And there's other people that are living very close to how the design ought to work. And they're seeing success. So on the front end, as we jump into relationshipology, specifically looking at how marriages are designed to work, we need to be aware that some people aren't getting it right. But at the same time, there are people who are. And you want to be on one side of those, right? There's an obvious side you want to be on. There's an obvious side we want to pursue to understand how can we have a marriage that works according to the way it's designed. We're going to be working through Ephesians 5, 21 through 33. This is sort of the classic marriage passage, but we're going to come at it a little bit differently. And as we work through this, I want you to look out for a couple things. One, yes, we're looking at God's design, but also through this, there may be a couple red flag things where if you understand them, they would be the moment that saves your marriage. I don't want to sound too dramatic about that, but I'm serious, that these are the things that if you don't get these right, marriage won't work. This is a big deal. It's a big passage. It's a big subject, right? So we're spending this little bit of time talking about, from a 30,000-foot view, what marriage is. We're not going to be able to cover it all. So I'm going to blow past quite a bit. And I'm going to just make some comments. And some of those you might be like, oh, that's a great thing. I want to understand more about that. You can call me or text me or email me. My contact's in there. I might go over something. You're like, oh, I don't like how that is. I want to argue about it. Ryan's contact is in there. You can pick it up with him. He's the counseling guy. Ephesians 5, starting in verse 21, Paul says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, for which he's the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So let's start off on this discussion with what marriage is. What marriage is. Marriage, as a quick definition, is a legal, permanent, exclusive commitment to love. Now, I defined it that way on purpose. Legal, permanent, exclusive commitment to love. And some of you guys are already disagreeing with me in your head. Well, it doesn't have to be legal to be, it doesn't have to be permanent. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Because words mean things. And so if you would like a relationship that is less than this, that's fine, but you don't want to be married. That's not what marriage is. If you take any of those aspects out, you may have a relationship, you may enjoy that relationship, but it isn't a marriage. To be married, it needs these things. And honestly, I think if you are disagreeing with me, usually it's going to come in that love word, right? Because if you've adopted a cultural sense of love, the sort of fake definition of love, it would be pursuing something for me. Follow me on this. The cultural sense of love actually is a selfish endeavor. It doesn't feel that way at first. It doesn't look that way. It presents very nice. Oh, you make me feel so happy. I just love being around you. I just want to share my life with you. And you're like, I said those things. I might have said those things in my marriage ceremony. Those are not in themselves bad, but who's the focus of those? It's a selfish thing. I'm so excited for you to make me happy. I can't wait to share my life with you because I want you with me. That's fine. And those feelings in themselves aren't bad, but if that's the basis, you're going to get in trouble. It actually, if I would define it this way, the cultural love, that fake love, is not so much telling you how much I love you. It's telling you, I guess, how much I'm comfortable taking from you. I'm comfortable taking a lot of intimacy. I'm comfortable taking safety. I'm comfortable taking resources. I'm comfortable we can be really close. I'm comfortable pulling those things from you. Now, that is an aspect of what a joined life looks like, but that can't be the basis of how you love each other. Real love, biblically, as we see it defined, is actually going to be about the other. It's going to be the commitment to the good of another. It's not how much am I comfortable taking from you, it's how much am I willing to give up for you. That becomes the measure of love. How much am I willing to give up so that you can have good? And we'll be honest, we love some people more than we love others, right? That's normal. And how would you draw that line? Well, I love this person, I love my kids so much, I would die for my kid. I love them as much as I could love, right? And there's that other person, that friend that you're like, yeah, I love you, man. Great to see you. I'd give you like $5, give you a hug. I'm committed to a certain extent, and that's my limit of love for you. And that's okay, because you don't have to love everybody the same way. You got to love everybody. You don't have to love them all the same way. Love has to be defined in the sense of self-giving. It has to be commitment to the other. It can't be just this sense of take. Now, the sense of take feels good, but truly, the commitment is when I'm willing to give even of myself for your benefit. That's what love is. That's how it's defined. That's how we see it. And that's why marriage has to be this permanent, legal, exclusive commitment to this type of love. It has to function that way. And because when we're committing to something, now I can love you, but I don't have to stay there, right? Like you may have loved someone really a lot in the past, and because of circumstances, they've taken too much, or it didn't work, or you've learned, or they grew, or whatever it was, and you love them less now. You're committed to them less. That's okay. That's how life works. My point is, marriage, you can't do that. That's why it has to be permanent. That's why it has to be legal. That's why it has to be exclusive, because the commitment has to be outside of you. That's the way marriage always has worked. There's a sense of, now hear me on this. There's a sense of duty. There's a sense of obligation. And I know that's not like this really sexy word that we like to throw around with marriage. It's like when I look at you, Beryl, obligation. That's what I think. Doesn't float. But it's not a sexy word, but it's a sturdy word. It's not a feelings word, it's a 50-year kind of word. It's a consistency kind of, it's a deep rootedness. When we enter those vows with each other, it's an exchanging of the promise to be faithful. That has to transcend circumstances. It has to transcend, okay, so this love that I'm committing to, I'm going to pursue what's best for you, consistently. That has to be promised outside of me. Let me put it this way. Occasionally, you have the young couple and they want to get married and they come and they do the counseling and they're like, oh, we just love each other. I'm like, oh, that's so cute. Like, oh, Pastor, can we write our vows? And I'm like, oh, no. You can't. Because I know what you're going to say. I just love you so much. I just love you so much. I just love you so much. Well, I can't wait for you to make me happy. That's what that is. I promise to enjoy you. I can't wait to share this life with you that I know will make me happy. Right? That's what those vows that people write end up being. That's why you don't go to the lawyer and you're like, hey, I'd like to write my own contract. I'm just feeling extra sparkly today, You don't do that because there's an intention to it. I'm writing this so it produces the right sense of obligation, of duty on both sides so that this will be permanent. Right? And marriages have always worked this way. This is not just like, oh, no, you're kind of reading into... No, across all cultures. So God has designed marriage, as we just read, but he's given it to humans as an institution. And so there's this promise, this covenant. You want to use that language? It's good language. It's always had a couple things. It's like, well, here are the people. Here are the obligations or the duty, the contract. And here's a public way that we, the legal term would be like ratify it. Right? This is always, goes back in history as far as you want to go. It's always existed this way. And so they might, jump over the broom, right? They might stomp the glass. They might exchange rings or exchange coats, or they might cut an animal in half and walk through it, which I highly recommend we start doing that. And then you kind of come up, you cut your own piece of the pig, and you take it back for the barbecue. I just think it's an all-inclusive Westmark marriage wedding deal. Where am I going with this? All right. The ratifying, the legal aspect of this has always existed because there's a moment in time where we stand together in front of somebody, some peoples of some sort that in the community have the right to hold us accountable to that promise. And so you're like, well, I didn't do a big marriage and I feel bad about that. That's not what I'm saying. You could go to the justice of the peace, that's fine. But the piece of the covenant that exists there is I'm saying, hey, community, if I don't keep my obligation, you need to come get me. If I don't hold up my end of the deal, the promise to love one another, if I don't do that, then they have other rights. Like that's why this works between me and her is I need you guys to help me with that. Right? So marriage has always existed in this legal, permanent, exclusive type of way. And that's why I'm saying, you might say, well, I don't need a piece of paper to prove that yes, you do. You do. You do need a piece of paper to prove that you're willing to get a piece of paper. Does that make sense? You need to prove that you will commit if you want to prove that you're committed. And you might argue, well, I want it this way. And I don't care. I didn't ask. We didn't consult you before we decided what marriage was. That's not how it works. God designed it. He handed it to us and said, this is the institution you need to do. This is how you need to hold it up. And so it looks slightly different across cultures, and that's fine, as long as it fits in these bounds. I hear that, well, they're married in God's eyes. Pretty sure this is God's eyes. Like, I'm pretty sure he lined it out right here. And then he said, please do this. This is what I'm asking you to do because this is the best way to do it. There's a design to it. And as we're going to get into, when we transgress that design, it hurts. It breaks. It breaks us. If you're somebody, and I don't know where everybody is, right? If you're somebody who's in a relationship and the other person will not commit to this, right? I don't need a piece of paper. Okay, usually what they're saying is, I don't need that to prove that I love you. Number one, do a little bit of homework to figure out how they're defining that love. Because I'm betting it has less to do with obligation and faithfulness and more to do with feeling and convenience. But just to do some homework on that. The second thing is when someone says, I don't feel like I have to do that, what they're saying is, I don't love you enough to commit. I may love you, but I don't love you that much. Right? I said there's levels of it, right? And what they're saying is, I can love you up to here, but once it gets to the point where I become obligated, I don't love you that much. I won't do it. And in some cases, it really is, I don't love you enough I need to make sure that door is always open. I don't love you enough to actually trust you that I would commit to this. I love you as long as I have an exit strategy. In which case, if that's the conversation, I think at least one of you should realize that this is probably the end of the road. Fun stuff. All right. Marriage. Yeah, so it's this commitment. It has to transcend circumstances. That's sort of the purpose of it, right? You can't be married for this reason and then, well, circumstances change and I'm not. No, it's the thing that is consistent, right? So in 21, he kind of starts out by explaining how you get there. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people on the front end will be like, I don't need a piece of paper. I don't want to do it that way. Okay, all right. Why would you? Right? This is hard, and it's inconvenient, and it costs you a lot. So why would you even go this route? Well, it says out of reverence for Christ, this is how marriages ought to work. When I look at Jesus, when I understand what Jesus has done for me and what he's called me into, there's a reverence, there's a fear, there's an awe of him that says, okay. Not because I fully understand, not because I fully even necessarily agree, but because of who he is. There's something about Jesus, and I revere him. His love has changed me in a way that I'm looking at him going, all right, I don't have to necessarily get it, but it's how he designed it. That's important. That's where we begin, because now this awe of Jesus motivates us to a love that is better than what we knew before. Marriage is designed by God. So this design, you can argue with it, right? You can try to ride that wacky packer all day. Yeah, you can try. That guy made it like 25 seconds, and it was bad. I think he broke his ankle. But the point is, you can try, but it will not work. Things will break, and you can break the rules, but then it's going to turn around, it's going to kind of break you. You can try to go about it a different way, but that will eventually dry up. You won't reach the success that is promised because you're not using the way it's designed. For instance, here's one of these. One of these that we neglect quite often, and it comes back and bites us. Marriage is designed to be partnership with your best friend. That's the design of it, right? It grows out of that friendship DNA. We talked about that last week, that these people, this person, and you say, I accept you, and I'm going to do this work, and I see you, and I know you. We all remember last week, right? You all were here, most of us, and we remember it. Okay, so you remember I gave you like the 4 points. We remember, okay, so let's say them together. The first one, I know. No. That's embarrassing. Yours are the worst. All right, so I wrote them out for you because I figured you didn't pay attention at all. Number one, and you have to have these convictions in order for friendship to work. These are the steps that you work toward to create healthy friendship. Number one is that I know I'm worth knowing. Number two is that I know they're worth knowing. Number three is I accept the risk that's going to be inherent in trusting one another. And number four is I accept the work to make this relationship go forward. Those are the 4 things. And as you keep those 4 things in mind, that enables health to exist in a friendship. And what I'm trying to explain to you, hopefully connect the dots, is that marriage actually grows out of that. That you have the friendship, and the friendship grows so strong and so exclusive and so knit together that it becomes this sense of, I couldn't imagine actually doing this with anybody else. And maybe I could, maybe, things break apart and I could probably find someone and trust and learn to be, but this works. This is good, what we have together. And together, we're good for each other. And that's what friendship starts as, and it gets stronger and stronger. And really, your best friend, your primary, ought to be your spouse. And so this is a part that we neglect. It's a part of the design that we sidestep, and then we pay dearly for it. What happens is, back to that fake definition of love, I'm in this for how it kind of works for me. You end up with this pros, cons, kind of bargaining mentality. Well, I'll do this, and then you do that, and then I'll get my other needs over here. Like, as long as you keep doing this, I'll put up with that garbage that you do, and then we'll be okay. And over time, that sort of mechanism, that business partnership, it falls apart. Because you don't need another business partnership, you need a friend. You need someone who's going to walk with you. Not someone who's going to not someone who's the best deal. But that's how we end up viewing them. So this DNA of friendship is what grows a healthy marriage. It's designed to be there. It's designed to be primary. That's why if it isn't primary, there's always tension. right? There's always a sense of like, well, why is that more important than me? Right? How many arguments are you replaying in your head right now where you're like, right? Well, why are you working late again? Well, why is there always time for what you want to do, not what I want to do? Why is there money for what you want to do? Why is that more important than me? Because marriage is designed to be your most exclusive, primary, best friend relationship. It's your number one human relationship. It has to be. And if it doesn't, if you kind of push it off to the side or you push it down, it'll bubble back up. It will create that tension. And so some of you, I hope, are having light bulbs of like, oh, that's why that keeps happening. Because I keep shoving it down to number 4. It will come back up. And so Paul, he quotes Genesis in this passage. I don't know if you pick that up. In 31, he says, for this reason, this design, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. That's pretty primary. It's pretty, that one flesh, that united, you can think of the things that are being held on to, things that are unmovable, you can't separate them. The old word is cleave. That's a good word. What's the opposite of cleave? Well, a meat cleaver, right? It takes a minute to get those apart, and it's not fun. They're cleaving. Leave your mother and father. Ooh, how many relationship discussions. Energetic conversations are wrapped up in leave your mother and father. Right? Because this needs to be primary. We need to build a life that, well, when I grew up, I didn't. Well, you're not growing up anymore. So, what works for us? What's best for us? Well, my dad always did this. Well, my mom always did. What are you going to do? What makes sense? What works for you? You can redefine those things. You can make those fit. But here's the other side of this. If you hate your mom and dad, you still haven't left either. Right? Because you're carrying just as much of that influence in. That's still going to control you. That's still going to shape you. Well, I will never be. Well, maybe you ought to a little, Take a breath for a second. That you might need that. Can you leave those other things? Could you leave your career for your spouse? If you're dating or if you're thinking about being married and you realize, I wouldn't leave this career for that person, then don't waste your time. She wants me to give up drinking. Give it up. This hobby keeps getting in the way of us. Give it up. Here's a fun one. Kids. Yeah. More difficult to give up, but there's a lot of problems where people realize they wake up, they sort of realize hey, I love the kids and you love the kids and we don't love each other. And it's because they haven't done this. They haven't done any uniting. They don't view themselves together. A lot of those marriages that we talk about that dissolve do so right about the time kids get out of the house. Because there's nothing left between us. We had a domestic partnership. It's a problem. It's because marriage wasn't primary. You let it rot. So then the arguments come. Well, I would if he was more. Well, I would if she didn't do so much. What they're saying is, you know what? I would do that work of the committing and the duty and the obligation and the faithfulness. I would do that if I had the intimacy. No, wrong. That's backwards. That intimacy is going to come out of the work that you do together. You can't wait around for that to just appear by itself and then decide. No, you do the work and the intimacy comes out of that. When we talk about intimacy, people have all sorts of things. So intimacy, I define it as experiencing vulnerability and belonging simultaneously. It's that I'm fully vulnerable and I am fully belonging. right? And so there's terms in here, the Bible will use this term as well, but this nakedness, that there's nothing between us. And you can put it in all sorts of different categories of life, in that emotional, obviously the physical. There's the past, there's the hopes, there's the fears. And this sense in which I'm sharing with you and I'm opening, hey, I don't have anything left to hide. And in that time, you're accepted. You belong. Not that everything is good, not that everything needs to stay the way it is, but I don't reject you. And that experience is what we would call intimacy. That experience is what we would call closeness. It's a closeness. The vulnerability. Now, the risk is there. And so what a lot of people are wanting in marriage, I sit down with them, and what they say is, well, I just want to be intimate without taking the risk of being vulnerable, and then I will do the hard work of committing after that. It's like, oh, that'll be $70, and you pay the lady on your way out. I don't have anything else to say. That's not how it works. That's not how it's designed. You need to be able to risk that. And here's a question. Can you? Here's one of those save your marriages moments in this sermon. Can you share with your spouse what's important to you? No, because they'll use it against me. No, because they're going to hurt me with it. No, because they'll ignore me. No, because I tried and they don't. No. Okay, you need to tell them that. I don't trust you with our finances. Like, I can't share with you what's going on here. We can't have a nakedness in that part of our relationship, that vulnerable thing where we fully know each other. I can't do that. I can't tell you about what's happened in my past. I can't tell you about this. I'm afraid I can't trust you. Fill in the blank. If you can't do it, then you need to tell them that so that y'all can start working on that together, that you can build the trust to that point. Because what's going to happen if you don't? Nothing. You're on a downward trajectory with that, and nothing will change. You have to be able to step into the vulnerability. When a lot of times we end up talking about like sexual intimacy around this discussion, because it's the obvious one, right? And normally if that isn't taking off, then there's problems elsewhere. Okay, so in that discussion, you can think back to kind of how this all began, right? Adam and Eve. God makes Adam. Adam doesn't have anybody. God makes Eve, and when Adam sees Eve, he says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. What is he saying there? He's not saying, dang, girl, you like 5 minutes old. You're looking fresh, you know? Look at that bone. That's my bone structure right there. I like that bone structure. That's not what he's saying. He's not talking about bone, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying bone by bone. We are the same. We are together. You're obviously very different than me, but we're the same. I can be known by you. We can be best friends. What he's saying is there's intimacy now. And when sin comes into the picture, what's the first thing they do? Cover. They pull away. When that's introduced, I can't be vulnerable anymore because I'm afraid you won't accept me. I'm afraid I won't have belonging. And so they pull apart. And that's what destroys our intimacy. We have to be able to remember those steps. Remember we have to, I know that I'm worth knowing, and I know that you're worth knowing, and so I'm going to take the risk of being known, and then when you show me who you are, I'm going to accept the work of knowing you. That's how we grow that. So if you're paying attention, you're going to notice that I've been building this argument for how this should go, right? Like this design. And it looks like this, that you begin with friendship, and it moves to legal, and then it moves to sort of the resources or the way you live, and then it moves into physical. That's how this intimacy, that's how this relationship should flow. And really along the way, some of the things that help you or progress, and it goes up and down, so it's hard to really chart, is the emotional attachment, the emotional intimacy we feel. This is how we see it laid out, but culturally, we see the opposite. Think about it. You download an app and you have sex with somebody, and then that makes you have butterflies for them, and so it's pretty great, and we figure out, you know what, maybe we should live together, and then somewhere along the line we decide to get married. I don't really know why, but then we do, and now we're married, and hopefully now we can become friends. Rough. I know a lot of people who have gone that path. I'm not like condemning you. What I'm saying is it's a hard one to choose. Like, it's tough. And I don't really know anybody, maybe I'll be corrected on this later when somebody comes up and talks to me, but I don't really know anybody who would say like, no, I love that. I chose that path. I would do it all over again. You can get there. Like, you can finish the race. Like, you can get to a healthy marriage from there. I get that. And you should. You should work at it. But if that's the one you're going to choose, like, you're going to cross the finish line with a lot more scars than you had to. It's just that's what it is. Why? Because that's not how it's designed. And so if you're single and you're still paying attention, because you might have been bored by now, start with friendship. Start with friendship. That's how it ought to be. Is start with friendship, because I know, look, you want to find a spouse. Okay, I know how you do this. All right, you walk in a room and you're like, bad hair, bad nails, bad breath, bad bone structure. There's just nobody available. And what are you doing? You're doing a baptized version of the wrong way to go about it. You may have passed over a lot of really excellent spouses. People who could be friends with you in the most intimate, great ways, but you didn't like their hair at the time. Don't do that. Start with friendship. Start with friendship. It's massive, and it'll change everything. Don't limit this, these dumb categories that are going to change so fast anyway. Don't limit it to that. Start with being friends with good people. See things develop. Now, in our passage, Paul, he splits off and he talks to husbands and wives individually. But he makes the same point for both. Really, that successful marriage really is beautiful friendship. Okay? And it comes differently from different angles, but it ends at the same place. So let me show you what I mean. 25, verse 25 through 30. He says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. Now, if you think critically through these words, he's like cleansing her, the washing, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish. It sounds like Paul says husbands are in charge of the cleaning. It's in the Bible. Sounds nice though. Cleansing, washing. You get this idea of like a bubble bath, right? Oh, this is going to be great. About 10 years ago, a couple of friends of mine from high school, they were in an oil field accident back in Wyoming. They were in an outbuilding, and the valve went bad, and it blew up. It was really bad, huge explosion. They survived, but it was rough, and we didn't really know how that would go. I remember there was a aluminum pipe wrench that was leaning up in one of the outbuildings, and it after the explosion, it was just a puddle. It was this big deal. Their life flighted out. There's two of them, and they life flighted out. They go down to take them to this. Greeley, Colorado has this really advanced burn unit, and so they're down there. And a lot of the problem was inhalation, right? It really wasn't. Well, the explosion was bad, obviously, and the burns were massive and horrible. But a big part of the problem was the breath they took during that explosion with the smoke and the heat. and it shriveled so much of their lungs. They're flown down there. They're in recovery, and I remember the first few days especially, some of their treatment, they would give them hot showers, and they'd use these rough pads, and they would scrub their burn wounds to rip off the skin. That dead skin that was in there, they didn't want that to get in the way of the regenerating skin and the skin grafts they were going to put on. That needed to be all cleared off. And I don't know if you've heard screaming like that before. I mean, so much of their body covered, and then to just scrub and scrub. But it was the only way to heal. Sometimes that washing and that cleansing, it isn't fun. And it isn't bubble bath. You think about that, like getting stains out takes a lot of work. And getting wrinkles out takes a lot of heat and intense pressure. And as husbands, if we were to say, I want what's best for my wife, and I'm viewing her and what's best for her as my goal, and I'm willing to commit to that kind of work. I felt really, really bad for my friends going through that. But I'll be honest, like a lot of my angst was connected to the nurses who had to listen to that and had to hold them down. Like that's hard. And it's hard to enter into someone else's mess and into their garbage and into their trauma and into their wounds and to do the right thing there. But that's what you're called to do. As husbands, that's what we're called to do. You're like, well, I don't necessarily know how to do it. Washing her through the Word. That's how Jesus looks at the church. He said, I'm going to give you more of Jesus. I'm going to give you more of God. I'm going to give you more of His Spirit. As you engage in the church, what happens is you learn more about God, right? And that's God's method. And He says, husbands, you should do this. Where your wife is wounded, she needs Jesus. How are you going to provide that? Not by being Jesus, certainly. How are you going to help her? How are you going to show up there? If you think about a picture, it says, well, be like Jesus, and you kind of think of Jesus in a lot of ways. Some husbands like to think of themselves as Jesus on the throne. It's no good. If you want to sort of identify with one of the roles of Jesus, I want you to picture Him washing His disciples' feet hours before He knows He's about to get arrested and die. And He sits there and He's scrubbing someone else's problem, someone else's dirt, someone else's stain. That was their fault. And He's leading in that. That's the role of the husband. Yes, you're leading, but you're doing through serving. He moves to wives. In verse 22, he says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, His body, of which He is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. When Eve was introduced to Adam as his ezer, or his helper, what I kind of designed, I think the best translation of that would be like necessary helper. It's not just like somebody, it's not like your hired man. It's like you can't get where you need to go as a husband if you don't have your wife. It's necessary. Yes, you have different roles, but they're necessary. The man is given the woman, and the woman is given to the man. And when that happens from both sides, right? So the man is accepting and the woman is being given. They both have to understand this is her role as the necessary helper. And the husband's role as that servant leader has to blend perfectly with that. She needs him to go where she needs to go, to be who she needs to be. If there was an image for you to connect to, wives, I would encourage you, Matthew 26. There's the woman who who anoints Jesus' head with a perfume, washes. I think that's a great picture of what the church coming to Jesus, right? And the wife to the man. And yes, you're serving him. Yes, you're helping him. And there's honor in that, and there's respect in that. But do you know what Jesus says about that? He says, she anointed me for my burial. She's helping him. She's assisting. She's necessary. There's a way that you can prepare your husband to be the servant leader that you need him to be. I'm not talking about being mom. I'm not talking about pandering. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when this is done right from both sides, you pour into one another. And it gets better and better and better. And the trust builds and the vulnerability builds. And there's been people, I know that there's been people who have used this and this language because they're evil or they're stupid. And they've used that to harm women. And they've used it to exalt men. And they've used it to stay in control. And they've used it to control victims. And all of that is wrong. When you read it as it's written, when you understand it as it's meant, the role of the wife as the necessary helper doesn't diminish, nor is it less important than the role of the husband as a servant leader. They have to work together. And he kind of brings this point out. Quick, which one's more important, your head or your body? Well, I guess. No, it's a dumb question. It doesn't make sense. Neither. Neither is more important. Neither gets to go first. And if you argue that, you're going to destroy yourself. You're going to get hurt. That's the design of it. That's how marriage is meant to work. In fact, if you think about it, even the gender differences make sense there. That's why there's gender. Like, I'm going to say this. There's gender differences to annoy you. Like they're put there on purpose to be different. And you think, okay, let me put it this way. Who is the easiest person in the world to be married to? Me. Hear me out. I'm right all the time. I know pretty much everything I need to know. I have flaws, but they're really easy to ignore. I play well with others, Like I like that's my resume. It's pretty good. I could be married to myself really, really, really well. And you think the same thing. Admit it. You think you're the easiest person in the world to be married to. Because it all makes sense. I just do it the way I do it. Why would you park that way? It doesn't make sense. The way I do it makes sense. You think that you're the easiest. Now, God loves you enough to put you with someone who will annoy you into growing. It's true. God loves you enough that he's going to put you with someone who finds your flaws not as easy to ignore as you do. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. In fact, in the role differences, in the gender differences, there's a beauty when you realize that God made us both in his image, which means one alone can't represent him well enough. There's a togetherness, and in that togetherness, there's joy. Marriage, it's sandpaper. Boy, I'm hitting them out of the park with analogies today, right? Baby, I look at you, I think obligation. I think sandpaper, And these two very different pieces of wood can be bound together. They can be created into one structure. It can become smooth. It can become one. It has to have that different. What I'm describing is what I call confrontational love. And hear me out on this. This is another save your marriage moment. If you don't have confrontational love, you're in trouble. You need to be able to call the other person out on their garbage. You need to be able to, if that doesn't exist, you're in trouble. Don't talk to me like that. Don't treat me that way. I need you home. I need this to work this way. You're not listening. You need to be able to tell them why. I can't trust you with these things. I feel like I can't open up to you about this. I feel like if I told you, if I went through this, if I really let you in, this wouldn't go well. And I'm scared of that. Your love needs to be strong enough that it will confront the other person. And this is the thing, is it has to be two-way street. Because normally what happens is those flaws that you've been ignoring so easily for so long, maybe not so easy on the other side. And when you confront them in love and in kindness, you need to be open for the confrontation to come this way. For instance, I was in marriage counseling once where this woman breaks down and she's like, I just feel like I can't talk to you and I can't do this and I can't, just blah, 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 you know? Wives. And she, just kidding, I'm just playing, it's a joke. She does all this, she dumps it all out. And he sits there for a second, he's just kind of a little stunned and he goes, why? And in that moment, she realized it actually wasn't his fault. See, she hadn't tried. She had her own garbage that was stopping her, and then she's sitting there in her own head, blaming him for all this, and it's building like this pressure, blah, 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 boom, and he's like, I didn't know any of this. Classic husband. You need to be able to accept that part of it, because it takes two to tango. It does. It always does. There's problems, and 99.9% of the time, it's from both sides. You need to love that person enough to be confrontational with them. If you are willing to do that work, it's worth it. It's worth it. And in a certain sense, there's like a really big hopefulness here that you can look at this other person and you go, man, it's not just that I felt a certain way. It's not just that this was fine. It's I see in there who God's going to make you to be. Really, that's this design, this is to be able to look at somebody and see not just where they are right now, but where God is taking them and say, I'm committed to that person. Right? The experience of being loved is when someone, you let them in, and as they're there, they really affirm and treasure the good parts about you. And because of the not so great parts, they don't dismiss you. It doesn't mean they say this is going to stay this way forever, but I'm not throwing you out. I see this and I treasure this. I see this and we're going to work on this together. That's acceptance. That's love. That's togetherness. That's the design of marriage to bring you into that. Tim Keller put it this way. Jesus didn't love us because we were lovely. He loved us to make us lovely. And you realize, man, that's how God wants us to act to one another. That the love of Jesus would work through us to minister to each other. To make us more lovely. Because there's times where you look at the other person and you're like, ugh. There's times where you're going to look at the other person and go, why? There's times where you look at the other person and you're going to be broken. And you're going to be disappointed. There's going to be times where you look at them and you're discouraged. And there's going to be times where you feel hopeless. And if you don't have the obligation that goes beyond the feelings of the moment, it would make a lot of sense to walk away. But then you really wouldn't get what marriage is all about. It's about changing you. It's about you two working together to move toward Jesus. Right? You don't look at each other and expect the other person to be Jesus. You lean on one another and you look toward Jesus. That's how it's designed. That's how it's supposed to work. Permanent, legal, exclusive commitment to your best friend. To love them, to be vulnerable with them, to trust them enough that you can share in real intimacy. And you treasure what's good about them. And you love them despite what's broken about them. You see where God is taking them. And And you walk into that together.